All right, I think she has given us the red light. So we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning for our first RISE event of 2021. I'm Christina Fugate and I'm here with my Ice Miller partner, Alice Kelly. Alice and I lead our firm's franchise practice here at Ice Miller. And we're really excited to have Dean Marks and Matt Kelly here with us today to talk all about commercial real estate. For those that haven't joined us before for our RISE series, this webcast is designed to bring our Ice Miller friends together to hear about their paths to success, their stories, and to talk about issues that we're all facing in today's world. If you haven't caught any of our prior webcasts, you can find them on our Ice Miller franchise webpage. We've got a link to those recordings, so check them out. And we want to keep this conversation engaging. It's a conversation among all of us. And so there is a question box on your screen. Feel free to use that. We'll keep an eye on it and try to get to your questions throughout. And if we don't, we'll try to get to them at the end if time permits. And also keep with us to the end because we have an exciting drawing for two of our attendees. So I'm very excited about that. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Alice to introduce our guest today.
Good morning, everyone. As Christina said, I'm Alice Kelly. I am obviously based here in our Chicago office with the Chicago flag. We always kick off our RISE since it's so early in the morning, well, at least in Chicago, with our first poll question, which is, do you drink coffee, tea, or something else in the morning? For me, it's coffee. And I was just commenting to my husband this morning that these to-go cups my sister-in-law bought me last Christmas. I think she thought I'd take to the L, but instead I take them upstairs. All right, let's see where we go with our poll.
I'm definitely a coffee. I've got my big jug today to keep me going.
So I'm going to introduce our esteemed guests. At first, I just want to say thank you so much. It's really exciting to have you both here. And one of the things we'd ask when you give us your spiel about yourself is whether you drink coffee, tea, or something else in the morning. First, I'd like to introduce Matt Kelly, who is CEO of JBG SMITH. They are, among other things, the owner of most of HQ2 in Virginia for Amazon. And then also Dean Marks here in Chicago, who is a principal at Sterling Bay, and they are the developer of Lincoln Yards. And if you're not in Chicago, that is a very exciting multi-use development coming to the north side of Chicago that's going to repurpose a rather deserted place right now. So with no further ado, Dean or Matt, whoever wants to go first, say a little bit about yourself.
Matthew.
Dean, I'll give it to the local first.
Okay, happy to do it. Thank you, Alice and Christina, for having us. Matt, it's good to see you again, even virtually. My name is Dean Marks. I'm a managing principal here at Sterling Bay, and I drink coffee and lots of it in the morning to get going. Tea maybe a little later in the afternoon, but mostly coffee. Alice, I don't know if this is where you want us to talk about our journey into real estate, or it was just the intro?
I think just an intro, if you want to say a little bit about you. We've got lots of pointed questions for our guests.
Sure. I was, so I've been at Sterling Bay a little over 12 years. I was our general counsel for just about 10 years and transitioned to the managing principal role where we supervised kind of all the major complex transactions that we're working on here at Sterling Bay. And as you mentioned, a big focus right now in Chicago is our Lincoln Yards project. It's a 55-acre multi-use development that we're very excited about kicking off this coming spring.
Thanks, Dean.
Okay, my turn. I'm Matt Kelly. As Alice said, I'm CEO of a publicly traded real estate company based in Washington, D.C., and we have the dual distinction of being the largest landlord to the federal government in the United States, and also landlord to Amazon for their second headquarters. Some of which has been turned over to them, some of which is under construction. I know that's a sore spot for Dean. Sorry about that, old buddy. And I have the other distinction, dual distinctions of having been hazed by Alice as her younger brother growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, but also having had the privilege of hazing Dean when we were fraternity brothers, and he was coming up behind me.
2 years younger than you.
Yeah. So
You were very nice.
So, Melania would be chagrined at all of the hazing and bullying that, we represent amongst the three of us. But in any case, it's a real treat to share the screen with you guys today. I'm really, really happy to be here. Appreciate you putting this together.
Thanks, Matt.
That's great. And I'd love to hear a funny story. So before the end of the day, we gotta hear at least one story among the three of you. But anyways, let's turn it. Dean, I know you were trying to jump ahead, but I'd like to hear about your path to the real estate world and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I grew up, my family had a real estate development company here in Chicago, and they did some interesting projects as I was going through high school and college. The House of Blues, the Hard Rock Hotel, those were some interesting deals here in the city that I got to watch go through. My dad, an older brother. After college, without much of a better plan, went to law school and got into real estate legal practice. And at my second law firm, I started representing some small developer clients that really nobody wanted to represent. One of them, the good people here at Sterling Bay. And fast forward to the real estate collapse of 2008, and Andy Glore was gracious enough to bring me in-house here at Sterling Bay, and we kind of took off and didn't look back. And that's kind of how I ended up here at Sterling Bay.
That's great. And Matt, what about you? How did you get into real estate?
So I found my way to real estate actually from reading a book called The Real Estate Game written by a guy named Bill Porvu, which some people may not know, but in investing circles, he's a pretty well-known guy. There's a firm in Boston called the Baupost Group that has one of the better reputations out there. Warren Buffett was on record saying that the only hedge fund he would ever give his money to manage would be Baupost. Seth Klarman, the guy who runs it. And Bill Porvu was one of the founders of the Baupost Group. He wrote this great book. I read the book. I thought real estate sounds like a terrific industry. Is this book all bullshit or is this real? And so I sought him out, spent with the guy, and asked him, where should I go work? And he said, you should go to JBG. And I said, who is? I don't know a soul there. Anyway, fast forward, I followed his advice, and my plan was to work for a couple of years at JBG. Obviously, I failed miserably in executing on that plan because here I still sit 17 years later. But it's been a great run, and Washington has been a really fantastic city for real estate over that time.
I think if you're going to stick around, end up CEO is a pretty good outcome.
I agree. Yeah. So
I'll take it. I'm not complaining.
Yeah, and I think also the HQ2 project is also something that is a great accomplishment as well. And I understand that there was some friendly competition leading up to getting the HQ2 project. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can take that one. I thought it was a competition. We have our site here in Chicago that we feel is the best located campus headquarters site, in our opinion, in the country. We were competing in the HQ2 process with the other sites here in Chicago, and felt we were making a pretty compelling pitch. At the same time, I was kind of, texting and emailing back and forth with Matt, good luck, best of luck. If we can't win it, I hope it's you. Lo and behold, it was them. And so I'm still very happy for you, Matt, but still wish it had turned the other way. But again, you guys have a great site, and it was a great outcome for you and HQ2.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that, Dean. Yeah, it was actually really awkward for me the last couple of months before it became news. We didn't really know definitively that we were the winners either, but we felt really good about our chances. We had heard through some back channel sources that we were their favorite. And of course, nothing is done until it says it's. For all we knew, it could go elsewhere, and it Chicago and Dallas were the other two cities in the top three. And I would get these text messages and phone calls from really say what I do under threat of execution for sharing confidential information. It was an awkward couple of months, but Dean sent me a very nice bottle of champagne when we won and was a very gracious competitor about it.
I commend you were very tight-lipped and you never let anything slip. So that was pretty impressive.
I can attest to that. You didn't even tell his family. I want our listeners to know that Matt is unfortunately struggling through the Verizon hiccups, so he might go a little bit in and out on the video. But I am torn about HQ2 because, of course, I wanted Chicago to get it, but I'm just so very proud of you, Matt, for being the one to get it. So it was a win-win for me. I did win. So back to our polls. It looks like most of us are coffee drinkers. Most of you are reticent, actually, don't want to share what you drink in the morning, which during COVID, I guess we shouldn't ask. But yes, 14% tea, 33% coffee, 10% other, and 43% no answer. I'm not sure that adds up to 100, but I have to do the math. Adds up to more than 100. Our second poll, though, is, dear listeners, what is your role? It might not be in our list, but we provide a couple items there. Are you, as you know, Christina and I are co-chairs of the franchise practice, so some of you might be franchise people. So give us an answer here, and we'll share those as well. And Christina, I also have a couple stories about Matt. I just don't know if they're for 8 a.m. Rising.
We'll let you think about those. So as Alice mentioned, we lead our franchise practice. So we work a lot with both franchisors and franchisees. And so I'm wondering, how does franchising play in the role of your development in your properties and some of your projects? Dean, how about you go first on that?
Sure. I mean, we seek out credit tenants wherever we can for, anchoring different developments. And so from a franchising perspective, those are kind of infill retail for us. And they're very important to the lifeblood of a development to have great options for F&B and retail throughout any of the development projects, whether office buildings with ground floor retail. One of the interesting things that's been coming up for us lately is we have a food and beverage concept called Federales that we've been rolling out across the country. There's one here in Chicago. It's a really good time. It's a taco and tequila joint where the shot glasses are made out of ice, and you do a shot and you throw it at a mission bell across the room. And if you hit the bell, it's this beautiful ring, and you kind of want to do it again. And if you miss, you kind of let's try that again. And so, there's one opening in Dallas, there's one opening in Denver. We're looking at other locations, I think one in Atlanta. And so I don't know if that's going to be a concept that becomes franchised on our end, but we'll definitely be talking to you about it if that's the direction it heads. So.
Sounds good. It sounds like it would be a fun night.
It's a fun night.
With all those, yeah. Matt, what about you?
We're a mixed use operator, and so retail is really important to placemaking and creating better neighborhoods. We concentrate a lot like what Dean and his team are doing at Lincoln Yards. To really make the kind of place, you need to merchandise the retail appropriately, and oftentimes that involves working with smaller concepts, a lot of local concepts. Sometimes franchisees. We're doing a movie theater. Did a movie theater deal last year, through a franchise operator, and there's a big focus, of course, on credit and track record, but also on the overarching health of the franchise itself. And so you're adding another dimension to your calculus about, do you want this operator in your project or not? And this market will likely be better for some of those smaller, less well capitalized players, because I think we're going to be entering into a world where a lot of retail fails, and there's a lot of vacant space, and there are not enough tenants to fill it, and it's going to be a real dogfight between landlords to get the best tenants, best operators. It's not great news for landlords. I think it's great news for operators, and it's probably great news for the consumer, because you're going to end up with operators who have more economically favorable deals that enable them to operate and survive and thrive better than they might have otherwise in a tighter environment.
Great, thanks both. So on to the crystal ball question. You kind of hinted at it with the coming year. Do you guys see any opportunities or even growth in 2021, and even farther 5-10 year time frame insofar as you can?
I think I'd like to hear from Matt first on this one.
Sure. So I think in terms of the real estate market, rates are so low and cost of financing is so low. I don't see great buys unless you're looking at distressed retail or distressed hotels. Maybe land here and there, but the fact is, real estate owners are much lower leveraged now than they were coming into the last downturn. So they have a lot more depth and capacity to hang on to their assets and not lose them to lenders. I think from an economic growth standpoint and the growth of cities and everything else, I actually think the backdrop right now is more favorable than it's ever been. Because if you step back and rewind the clock and look at what we were all talking about a year ago, it was shortage of talent. There wasn't enough labor for all the jobs that we had, whether that was software developers or truck drivers. And the cost of living in big cities was too high. And that was starting to constrain the ability of cities to grow. Well, now we have a new form of commuting, which we're all doing right now, that will open up labor and allow people to hire folks who live a little further out, maybe of the urban core, or maybe live in a different city altogether. The cost of housing in cities is cheaper now. Bad news for landlords, great news for the consumer and for cities. And, we don't have a labor shortage anymore. We have the opposite problem. So for the next few years, we're likely going to find that employers are not constrained by access to talent in their desire to grow. And so I actually think from an economic growth standpoint, there's really never been a better time to bet on some of these big cities and what's likely in store for them in the future.
I listen, I think you're spot on, Matt, and our bet has always been, urban centric, urban focused. And, we've seen a little bit of, I don't want to say flight to the suburbs, but there's been some reverse directional, transit with residences and businesses leaving the city center to the suburbs. I don't think it's permanent. I think it's something that we're going to see kind of snap back pretty quickly, at least here in Chicago. The city is vibrant and it's where you want to be. If you're a big company and you're trying to locate for talent and for labor, you want to be downtown. And so we strongly feel, to your point, that the urban environment is going to continue to thrive. I think there's going to be a little bit more focus on balance. I think that flexible work schedules and flexible commute options are going to come into play. All of our new developments are kind of studying how do you have the best technological infrastructure to allow for all that. In different asset classes, the hotel industry, just got smashed last year. And so it's going to be a struggle for it to kind of get back to where it was pre-pandemic. And I think it's going to take a little bit longer. But so far, we haven't been seeing, the distressed pennies on the dollar transactions that I think everybody thought they'd see by this point. I don't know if they're coming later in the year or if we're going to maybe sneak out of it, but I'm optimistic that we can get the hotel hospitality industry back on its feet here mid-21. I think that in industrial, we're going to continue to see the boom that we've seen over the last, not just year. It was happening before that, but the pandemic really accelerated it. And companies like Amazon, obviously, leading the charge there. And so I think in that area, we've been seeing a lot more micro distribution centers farther and farther into the urban core. Not necessarily the big, 200,000 square foot, facilities on the ring, but, smaller 30 to 40,000 foot accessible by van and bike distribution centers as close into the urban core as they can get them. And I think that's a trend that's only going to continue. And then in multifamily, we've been, we're pressing into multifamily for the first time here, and we've been learning it kind of as we go. But just the change in the perception of tenants for how they want to be living. Do you want to be living in an 80-story building, with no balconies? It seems like those things are changing pretty rapidly. So we're pretty excited about what 21 is going to hold. Thank goodness we have a vaccine, rolling out. Nobody knew how long this was going to last, and it seems finally we've got a little daylight. And so getting people back out, allowing people to gather. It's amazing what happens when you take away the ability of people to actually go out and get together. And so we're looking forward to getting that back and reigniting things like, concert venues and restaurants and bars and just, being able to get together with our fellow human beings. So.
Yeah, I would add one thing. And this is not an original observation. I heard this from Malcolm Gladwell on a webinar that I attended earlier this week, and he had a I think a pretty accurate observation, which is, and it was a rationale for why cities absolutely will come back, because you hear a lot from people saying, well, folks are moving out to the suburbs to get more space, and they're not going to come back. A lot of the folks that we're seeing in we manage about 5,000 apartment units, and folks who are moving out to the suburbs are doing it to buy a house. They're following through on a decision they may have been putting off for a little while, but they're finally doing it. His observation was that the reason young people move to cities is in part because that's where a lot of the jobs are, but it's also where all the other single young people are. And they want to see single young people. They want to date people and they want to meet people. And it's really hard to do that. If you live in Topeka, Kansas, yes, you could maybe get a job with a firm in Chicago and stay in Topeka, Kansas, but you're sure as hell not going to meet a whole slew of other young, educated professionals if you don't move to an urban employment center. And I thought it was a pretty accurate observation. And I think what you hear a lot when you hear people talk about these migration trends, in particular those who say, well, I don't know if cities are coming back. A lot of those opinions are articulated by people who are older, who are already married. They're not single. They're not living that experience. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think what we're seeing now with people moving out to the suburbs is that it's a generation of or it's a wave of demand that is probably stealing from future years. And we may see, in fact, an unprecedented increase in demand for urban housing after all of this is over.
My own empirical study is the people I know who move to the suburbs have children under the age of 5, and we're already on that trajectory. It just sped up. So that's my take on it, although I'm a franchise trademark lawyer, so.
I think these are really great observations, and I think you made one comment early on that is very on key, and that is, if we had this conversation a year ago, we would be talking about things that are much different than what we are now. And I think that's all as a result of COVID. And obviously COVID has made some huge changes. And Dean, you were talking about some of those the industrial space, for example, and bringing it into the city. And so what are some other changes that you're seeing as a result of COVID? And I know one, for example, I was on Sterling Bay's website not too long ago, and I saw on the Twitter feed talking about a fitness pod. It sounds like that's going into some like a parking garage or retail space. So talk about, what are these changes that COVID's bringing about in innovation and technology and so forth?
Sure. So, one of the obviously other hardest hit sectors was fitness, where you cannot, gather and get out of breath and get sweaty with a bunch of other people around you when there's an extremely contagious virus. And so the fitness industry was obviously very hard hit. we had a fitness provider come to us with a concept that he wanted to launch, and it's called Bold Fitness, and it's they're shipping containers, so individual gyms that you can rent by the hour. We've got, I think, 4 of them in a parking lot adjacent to one of our buildings here, and they're really nicely done inside with equipment and then ventilation, and then they get extremely deep cleaned and sanitized after every use. And so you can go and rent the pod for an hour. It's a super reasonable price, and get your workout in, and you can even bring a trainer with you if you want. And so I think that's kind of an interesting thing, because at least for me, I was not much of a gym person anyways. I like to exercise, but I do it in the privacy of my own home usually. But for people who want to kind of get out and get the equipment experience, this is kind of an interesting option that we saw. That's one thing we've seen. The other thing that we're seeing is really a focus on the wellness of the occupant, whether it's a tenant or a resident. Internal air quality has become kind of a bellwether metric as of late. It's something we were focused on pretty early, and so getting to answer questions with tenants of what is the health of the building, what is the regularity of the air changes in the building. I think we just got a pretty decent part of our portfolio well certified that brings it up to compliant or up to the highest standard for wellness across the real estate industry, and it's something that I think is going to become industry standard. Not an extra. You're going to have to kind of have it to be in the competition and in the discussion in general. And then, just other safety focused things, destination dispatch elevators, something that we've been doing in our buildings for a while. And at the time, it's because they are more efficient and they save travel time. Now have become, a new thing from a health and wellness standpoint, and that it's less buttons you have to touch in an elevator. So little things like that, I think, are just going to become industry standard, and we're not going to notice them. You're going to get into an elevator, and the next time you get into an elevator and see buttons, in 5 years, you're going to kind of chuckle because they're going to be a thing of the past.
It's going to push all the buttons now.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah. The other thing that that we're expecting, and I don't know if anybody can. The use of commercial space will play out, but one of the things that we're expecting is that office spaces will become very different in the future, and will be totally reimagined in a way that I think makes them look and feel more like comfortable residential gathering spaces, living rooms, more seating areas, the types of working spaces that make people really want to come into the office, rather than jamming people into a bunch of close quarters workstations. Instead, making more gracious seating areas that are more comfortable and more visually appealing, because it's likely that just as an employer, a threshold level of amenity will require that employees have some flexibility to work from home some of the time. It may not be all the time. It may still mean that you're going to need to accommodate peak capacity of your office space. So tenants may not actually take less space. I'm sure many will try if they can to save money. But I think what we'll see is that, like you have student centers on college campuses or study areas in college campuses that are really well appointed and comfortable, you'll see some of the same types of spaces start popping up in amongst commercial tenants, commercial office tenants, as a way to really make it appealing for people to come into the office and do their work there, recognizing you're not maybe going to have everybody in the space all the time. So if those spaces have, more square feet per person, that might be okay. You may end up with maybe no change in footprint, better space, and maybe slightly fewer people there on any given day.
We agree that we think it's basically going to be a wash. You might be able to let 30% of your workforce work remotely, but you might want 30% more space than you normally would have given or allocated for them. And so essentially, as Matt suggested, the footprint stays the same, but the layout will change. You're not going to see the 120 square feet per person kind of cube farms that maybe you saw in years past.
That's good to hear. I was afraid I was going to lose my office and end up in a cubicle. So I forgot to get back to our second poll. It looks like 29% of us are legal, 18% C-suite, 29% real estate, 14% franchising, 7% just here for fun, and fully a quarter of you did not respond. Maybe too early. So 2020, and it looks like 2021, well, that would happen in 2021, but 2020, we had all these shutdowns in both DC and Chicago, followed by civil unrest that spilled over into damage and destruction. Just curious, a lot of people didn't see that coming. How do you prepare for it in the future, and how do you rebuild from it?
Want me to take that one first?
I would love to hear your opinion first.
Yeah, look, I think for a lot of people, this was on TV only, right? Because people were not commuting into their office, so they weren't seeing it firsthand. They weren't seeing boarded up windows or crowds in the streets, because a lot of it was happening in sort of in downtowns. And so, for a lot of us, it was just something on TV. And so I do think that changes the impact that it has on people from a fear factor standpoint. Peaceful protests, I don't think bother anybody. When things get violent, people get nervous, they get scared, they start to wonder, is the city I live in or work in safe anymore? And I think there's probably a little less of that, because it wasn't something most people experienced firsthand. It was something that was a little bit over there. I do think those cities have to be really careful, because, I don't know where the tipping point is, but there is a tipping point where you experience just a little too much unrest or lack of safety or crime. And all of a sudden, your mentality about your city changes and people don't think it's safe. And that can start a nasty death spiral for certain neighborhoods or even cities. And, Washington, D.C. just started growing its population in the urban core about 10 years ago. For almost 50 years prior to that, the city shrank almost every year. That's terrible. And it took about, almost, 50, 60 years from the 1968 riots for the city to get back on its feet. So these things can happen quickly. People can lose confidence quickly, and it can take more than one generation to get it back. And so, I know there's a lot of politics involved in all of this, defund the police and other things. But police forces around the country are seeing higher levels of retirement than they have in years past, and they're not bringing in new cadets at a high enough rate to replace those who are retiring. So we're ending up with understaffed police forces, which actually doesn't help this whole dynamic at all, because then they're overworked and stressed. And so I do think, business people need to put pressure on their cities to make sure that there are enough resources there to keep things under control and from getting out of control, because that really can have much higher ripple effects and economic costs.
Yeah, to your point that a lot of it occurred in people's minds on TV. It was scary for a hot minute here in Chicago. I live, downtown in Wicker Park, near the intersection of North and Damon, and there were riots up and down the retail corridor in Milwaukee and Damon, and there were smashed storefronts. And when I drove down it the next morning, some of the stores have been boarded up. Some people were sweeping up glass, and it was a tough one to kind of internalize that this was happening, 2 blocks from my house. It was a tough one to explain to my kids, what had happened. And then kind of a little bit further downtown in the office areas in Fulton Market and in the Loop, we had, some properties that were looted. We had some properties that were damaged. We had, I want to give a shout out to our property management team, who did an unbelievable job already dealing with pandemic issues, and then, civil unrest and rioting on top of it. And to keep those buildings, safe and secure to the greatest extent they could, was an unbelievable effort. And it was eye-opening because it was happening right here, right down the street, in buildings we own, in near buildings we live in. And it was shocking. And so to Matt's point, there is a tipping point where you don't snap back from it. And thankfully, I don't think we got there. I think that, the turnover in the White House, I think that was extremely helpful to settling people down in general. But it was something that we hope we never have to deal with again. And I'm just, I'm proud of how our city handled it at the end of the day. But boy, it was terrifying when it was going on. So hopefully those days are behind us for the time being.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of issues from 2020. We see some good prospects for 2021 and beyond. But a question for you: what keeps you up at night? What's on your top of mind? What are the issues that you're constantly thinking about?
I think we're going to need more time. Yeah. Look, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going on in the stock market. I thought I was a fairly smart, astute person. I have no idea what is happening in the stock market. And I just don't know if there's something, epically bad on the horizon for us there. What that does to the rest of the economy, again, I'm not, smart enough to prognosticate on that, but I keep wondering, what is happening in our economic, climate in our country right now, just because I can't understand it, which again, maybe that's neither here nor there, but that's, one thing. Honestly, joking aside, I sleep pretty well. I think we've laid a pretty good foundation here at our company, both in Chicago and kind of expanding nationally. And I'm really excited about what the future is holding. Again, grateful that seems like we're seeing the beginning of the recovery right now with vaccine rollout. Because there were some pretty depressing seminars and podcasts I sat in on in mid 2020 that this is going to be 3 to 5 years of slow, sloggy recovery. So I'm still hoping for the V-shaped snapback, which I think has a chance. But in general, what keeps me up are sharp guys like Matt Kelly, doing what we do, better or as well or better than us, and us having to make sure that our game is up to task to compete with them.
I appreciate that. I don't know if it's accurate in my case, but I think a number of things Dean mentioned are they kind of get to just general uncertainty. It feels like we're standing on a knife's edge in terms of politics and in terms of where does the economy really go from here? What does everything look like when all this is over? Is this going to be over, when we think it is? Is there a new strain? The last two strains of coronaviruses were much more lethal than this one. Does this one change to become like those? And, are we living like this for years? So there, I've heard, I'm on a couple of boards where, one the Urban Institute, and there are a number of mayors and police chiefs and others and former governors on that board. And some of them, they talk about tabletop exercises that people do when they're, kind of like what, war games that a lot of defense contractors, do. And there's certain things you don't know what's going to happen until you actually simulate it. And everybody across the board has said, well, we never simulated this. We never simulated this series of events. And you think about that and you realize, this was not something any of us ever expected we were going to live through. And when you look back at history, think about how people felt when they were coming out of World War I and after the Spanish flu pandemic. They must have thought, wow, we've really been through the ringer. Our best days are ahead. And look what happened. So you don't know what's coming. The world's getting hotter. It's getting more complicated. One thing is true. Real estate tends to outperform when things like that happen. And it tends to be, a pretty safe asset class. So at least from an economic standpoint, I feel pretty good about, you know, the career path that I chose. But those are the kinds of things that keep me up at night. It's just not knowing what the next, you know, black swan or, you know, orange swan or whatever you want to call it is going to be.
Great, thanks both. You know, the next question is more about technology, and both to your point that real estate tends to be more of a safe, staid investment, long-term hold in people's minds. What kind of technology is there that you see or you'd like to see in your industry?
So I can go, Matt. You know, prop tech is kind of one of the next great frontiers in real estate. Getting that dialed in and having the best offering is going to be another distinguishing factor. You know, we're seeing that our tenants want constantly accessible information about their office environment, their parking options, their retail food and beverage options, you know, on their mobile devices. So you can check into the building with your phone. You can allow, you know, visitors access to your phone. You can order food, everything through your mobile device. And something that we've been rolling out across our portfolio is just kind of, you know, how do you enhance the tenant experience in general, and provide, you know, more options and more optionality and more information to those who want it. And so being able to book, you know, like the gym pod we were just talking about, you know, being able to do that and do it through a Sterling Bay, you know, sponsored website or app, accessing parking in different buildings that you might not be a tenant in but are owned by your landlord is another thing that we're kind of moving around. And so property technology and the information experience for the tenants, again, we talked about internal air quality. You know, we have displays now through our building telling the tenants, you know, what is it like outside? What is it compared to inside? And, you know, what are the particulates? And, you know, we've gotten some really interesting feedback that once you understand what those metrics mean, it's like trying to read an old mercury thermometer for the first time when you're a kid. Once you understand what they mean, it's helpful to know what's going on. And then if you see something, you know, moving in the wrong direction, you can go ask about it. So, you know, the technology that is here today, again, it's hard, to Matt's point, it's hard to know what's around the corner because it's been changing so unbelievably fast. I mean, I think when Matt and I were in college, it was right when email, Dartmouth was, you know, it was at the cutting edge because it had email for its campus, and that was like a big deal. And, you know, look, you know, here we are 20 something years later, and obviously that's just, you know, par for the course, but what's happening tomorrow is not what we're doing today. And so trying to figure out what that is kind of the trick. Yeah,
I think of it also in terms of what's likely on the horizon. And there are two areas I've heard are getting a lot of focus and attention now. One is what we're all experiencing right now, but it's three-dimensional, you know, video interaction. And obviously we have that already. There's, you know, VR and AR devices, but, you know, half the time they make you nauseated when you put them on your face. And so people are working on recreating the in-person experience in a better format. You know, you can argue whether that's good or bad for real estate. Probably bad for, you know, travel industry, probably bad for hotels, probably bad for, you know, office. But it will have an impact on real estate at some point. And I think we all have to believe that one day that's going to happen, right? You know, this idea that you could have a 3D movie in your home, you know, remember how earth-shattering that was? You used to have to go to a theater and wear special glasses, and, you know, you can do that now. So that will happen in our lifetime, and it will have a big impact on how people meet. And it won't replace in-person interaction, but it might replace, you know, optional in-person interactions and other things kind of on the margin. The other one has to do with sustainability and the technology of building systems. And, you know, the built environment is responsible for, you know, a lot of energy loss, and figuring out ways to retrofit and enhance and beef up and do better at, you know, limiting energy consumption within buildings. I think we're going to continue to see constant evolution and advancement on that front. And one that I know, a third one, I guess, that I would add too in that respect is just the cost of constructing a building. It takes so long, and there's so much required from a permitting, approvals, and other things standpoint. And then you look at other countries where obviously, there's corruption and maybe there's corner cutting, but it is possible to produce real estate much more economically and much more quickly. And I know people are working on this, prefab concepts and other things. They've been working on it for decades, and it really hasn't changed. But that to me is that is an end of the industry that is ripe for disruption, and the disruption there could be incredibly significant if you essentially lower the replacement cost of buildings. Again, probably not great for landlords, but it could open the floodgates for housing production and things like that, which from an economic growth standpoint would not be a bad thing.
So I just want to touch on that, Matt, because it's a great point. Earlier last year, kind of at the beginning, we were involved with a modular housing company, and the goal was exactly what you said, which is kind of disrupting the housing industry, in that we can produce these excellent units that come out and they're prefab and they're moderately affordable, and roll them out en masse. The goal was to create such a glut of supply that all housing becomes affordable instead of just legally mandated affordable housing. And while that company had some issues, it's still there and still kicking. And I think that you're going to see, to Matt's point, modular housing especially become kind of a focus as we move forward to get affordable housing in more places quicker and at lower cost.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I'm excited to see where that takes us in the future. I do want to switch gears a little bit for the next question and talk a little bit personally about you guys. So with COVID and being quarantined, we all turn to things to keep us happy and healthy. I turned to running. I try to run most days. I also started cooking more, which I never cooked before, but my kids and I started doing cooking lessons with my mom because she's an excellent cook. So we did virtual Zoom cooking lessons. So curious, on the personal side for you guys, what have you turned to keep you happy and healthy during these times?
Let's hear it, Matt.
Well, I think my other sister is also dialed in here. I saw her on the invite list. I don't know if she could join, but of course, calling both of my sisters frequently. Their expert and wise advice. My wife thinks I'm nuts about a couple of little things that are part of my morning routine. It's basically like what I eat for breakfast. I've maintained that routine and kind of what I eat and when I eat it. And prior to the pandemic, if I was out of some ingredient for my smoothie or whatever, it didn't really matter that much. But now it's like, I freak out if my pandemic routine is going to be disrupted. And so, you realize, and I try to exercise every day during the week. Don't always get to it. And it's easier to be on all the time and plugged in constantly when there's no boundaries or barriers anymore. So I've taken to scheduling BS meetings in my calendar that just block it off so that people can't start throwing meetings on there and trying to schedule things, because not everybody's view of urgent is the same. But it's a challenge, and I'm looking forward to getting back to a world where we have some of those borders and boundaries again, because it's really, we're not meant to live like this, and we can do it for a while and we'll get through it, but I'm looking forward to that.
Well said, Matt. So I'll be sure to ask Jasmine if whatever meeting is blocking our call is real or BS meeting.
She won't know.
What's funny for me, I kind of, I'm not proud of this, but I went the other way, where pre-pandemic, I exercised vigorously every day, but, at a gym or here or there or at home. And kind of when the shutdown started, I was like, oh, I'm going to take a break. And there's nothing easier than stopping exercising. It happened very quickly, and all of a sudden I was, looking at myself and saying, okay, it was a couple months and saying, okay, it might be time to get back on the floor and do some push-ups or something. So I had to kind of kickstart that again after taking a little break. But getting exercise every day. Another thing, can't say I'm proud of this either, was during the initial part of the shutdown, I'm pretty sure there was wine every night. Which was not something that was typical, but as this was kind of dragging on, every night around 4:45, my wife and I would look at each other and, okay, let's open a bottle of wine, and so that was a regular occurrence while we would cook. I think we're back to a healthier schedule, a couple days a week here and there. But the thing that probably kept me the happiest was the unbelievable amount of time I got to spend with my kids over the last year. It was, something that every once in a while I remind myself that as frustrating and as worrisome as this period was, I was getting to spend, 10 waking hours a day around my, at that time, 7 and 9-year-old, which, I wasn't entitled to that. And so getting that time with them, they were kind of like, Daddy, this is kind of cool. We're, you're around all the time. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of cool. But it's refreshing. And, now they're back in school, and now I'm back in the office, and, they kind of, have asked me, like, are we going to still get to kind of go on some of the trips that we took? Because that was the other thing that we did, was very stereotypically, we bought a used RV in the middle of this, and, took a couple of vacations that were working from the road. You're working from home anyways. I bought this little bus, and we kind of drove across country for a few weeks, and had an absolute blast. And they just gave me a photo album of that trip the other day, and we were kind of turning, and it already seems like way in the distant past. And I'm just thinking to myself, wow, you're probably not going to get, a couple 3-week vacations again anytime in the near future. So, you should cherish those. And those were great times, and the kids have great memories from that. And they thought the pandemic was, other than missing their friends, they thought it was kind of cool. They got to be on their iPads the whole time, and Dad around all day, and what's the big deal? So, everyone's excited to get back to routine and get back to normal. And so having the kids back in school and getting people back in the office, that's something that's been exciting for me, to get to see my colleagues again in person. It's just so much easier in person to solve problems and interact. Everything goes so much more quickly and smoother, when you can just pop your head into someone's office and ask a question instead of schedule a Zoom call. So I'm excited about having that ahead of us, but, part of me will miss the unrestricted freedom of, the shutdown.
Well, further to that, I would say personally buying a treadmill has been life-changing this last month, because I couldn't get outside with our wonderful Chicago weather. So highly recommend to anybody who's thinking about it. But in addition to that, is there something you want to keep? Dean, it sounds like your children made you a really nice photo album. I thought I was journaling everything, and I went and looked back. I really wasn't. Is there anything you guys would keep from this time?
The time with the family, dedicated family time. I think if I could keep one thing from this, making time to take, a good solid trip, because it's hard to unplug. Matt knows this as well as anybody. You don't really get to unplug from these gigs. And so even though you may go out of town for a week or 10 days, you're still, you're checking your email, you're responding, you're taking phone calls. And so, having that ability to kind of disconnect, even if we are going to stay, a little bit connected, I think if I could keep one thing, I would, hang on to that. And so, when I go and talk to Andy Glore later this year about why I want to go out of town for 3 weeks again, that's probably the one thing that I would hang on to, is, an extended family vacation. One more. I really envy the European model, where they just kind of close down for August in general. And I think that's, something that we're never going to get there in this country. We're too type A, but, I can still aspire to it. So.
Yeah. I think it's kind of hard to get back all that in-between time with your colleagues and still keep that in-between time that you have with your family when you're all in your house together. I mean, those are kind of the null set. But to Dean's point, being able to take a long stretch of time and just go somewhere else and have a different experience while still working and doing things would really be terrific. We're toying with the idea in our company. We're sort of a medium-sized business. We're about 1,000 people, and we are toying with the idea of taking maybe the whole summer, or maybe it's just a month or two, and saying this is a virtual period of time. And so anybody who's in the office, that's fine, obviously. But every meeting has to be virtually enabled, so that if somebody wants to go on an RV trip for 3 weeks, you're still expected to work, but you can take a vacation then also. But if you want to relocate, 2 months to go live with your cousins in California or Texas or wherever, you can do that and get more of that kind of experience out of it. Because my family, we relocated to Colorado for 2 months at the end of the year last year, and everybody did virtual school. I was working just about every day, but it was just such a neat experience to be in a different place. And so we're trying to figure out a way to keep that part going. And it has to be during the summer when kids are not in school, because I don't think that's going to be a permanent reality. But I think probably good for everybody's well-being if they could access that. And you don't have to be highly paid to do it. There are a lot of very inexpensive ways to do that. You could probably buy Dean's now third-hand RV off of it and take advantage of that.
I like that idea. I think that's great.
I love that idea. I'm going to tell you, I might steal it and bring it up here, Matt. We've long maintained, we're creeping up on February, that there's really no reason to be in Chicago for the month of February. It's a tough month, and it's a short month, so it would be a good virtual month, I think. But your point about school is well taken, so maybe I'll reposition it to the summer as well.
Yeah, there you go.
I used to joke that I spent more time out of town with Christina, my other colleague, Shyla, who used to work at Icefeller, just at conferences and business trips than I did with my own husband. But now it's me, Brian, all the time. So we're coming to the end here, and just thank you so much, guys. All this talk of virtual meetings and pods has me thinking of Ready Player One, of all of us with virtual reality on a treadmill. But I think, Christina, we have one more question.
I do, and then we'll get to the drawing right after that. But my final question is for both of you. If you could do it all over again, your path to where you are, would you change anything?
That's a tough one. I thought about this one a lot. I saw it at the bottom of the page because I can't, honestly, I feel extremely fortunate to be where I am today. And I think if I made any change on the path to get here, I would have ended up somewhere else. So I'm going to take there's nothing right now that I would change about where I'm at right now or how we got here. So.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't change a single meal I ate because I wouldn't want to deviate from the path I found myself on. I like Dean. I feel really fortunate, to have had all the opportunities I've had and had the mentors I've had. And just sometimes just being in the right place at the right time. We all know lots of hardworking people. We're all hardworking. We're all smart. We're all hardworking. But luck has so much to do with it, and I wouldn't want to jeopardize any of the good luck I've had. So I wouldn't change a thing.
Awesome. So as everybody who's been here before knows, if you stick around, you get a present. So we have two drawings today. The first one is from Federales, the concept that Dean talked about at the beginning with the ice shot glasses of tequila. And that feels like a Greek-Mexican idea of throwing something and smashing it. if there's any input there. So our winner of that gift card, if you don't know where it is, it's in the West Loop. It's got this awesome open space when we are actually in the summer months. So it's a great social distance place too. Is James Otto at CBRE. And then we also, in honor of Matt's company, are doing an Amazon gift card, which I don't know about you, I'm sure I have some packages out front right now. Our winner there is Jose Bedola. So if Kristen Fauser from Ice Miller will be in touch with you to give you your nice little gift. And we just want to thank you all so much for coming. We want to remind you that we have another Rise on Thursday, March 4th. It's going to be Ladies in Liquor, and it is Sona Bernecker-Hart of Koval here in Chicago and Elise Lane of Scarlet Lane Brewing in Indianapolis. And they're going to talk about their rise in the alcohol industry as women. So Dean and Matt, thank you so much. Maddie, it's always so great to see you. If you can't tell, Matt and I and our other sister are all redheads. We were much more red when we were younger. But yeah. And Christina's a redhead too. That's all.
It's kind of fake. We'll just go with it.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for coming this morning.
Thank you for having us.
And thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll be in touch.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.